Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rich, and I'm joined by my guest, Sean Tompkin. Hey, Sean, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rich. It's really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excited to have you on. Really looking forward to digging into this game here. But first, let's start off. How long have you been playing PBTA games, and what was your gateway?
It's been in the range of 5 or 6 years. I remember I first encountered Powered by the Apocalypse games through Apocalypse World, and was just really fascinated by the mechanics. I was on the outside looking in, right? I didn't buy the book right away. I was looking at the playbooks and looking at the move sheets, and it was just like this Rosetta Stone of fascination. Just like, what the heck is going on here? So definitely a light bulb moment, sort of mechanically and in terms of a narrative, sort of player-focused game. And from there, of course, I looked at the book itself. But Dungeon World was probably really my gateway, just because I found it a little bit easier to connect to and grok. It was a little bit more of a half step from traditional gaming for me. So that's where I actually got into the Kickstarter and played some games and got a little bit more involved with the other PBTA games through that.
Very cool. Yeah, Dungeon World is very welcoming for people who come from the D&D world of things.
Yep.
I like what Adam and Sage have done to make that a very welcoming and embracing kind of game. Apocalypse World is a bit of a head spinner coming from anywhere else in the RPG world.
Yeah, definitely. And the community, of course, has been a big help to that. I know there's that Dungeon World guide that was sort of a nice bridge for people to sort of understand.
Absolutely.
Some of the stuff that was implicit, in the book maybe, rather than explicit. So.
Yeah, then there's that podcast, this pod fading I've heard, or like closing out, or I don't know, there's some kind of Discern realities show.
Something, I don't know.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I don't know.
Heard that's pretty good for learning Dungeon World and kind of welcoming. Might have an AP section I stole, but hey, that's fine. Awesome. So Dungeon World, was that a big influence for Ironsworn then?
I mean, to a point, but the straightest line you could probably draw from Ironsworn to another PBTA games is City of Judas. That's a low fantasy. So I think you had him on your show a while back.
Yeah, I had Davide on quite a while back. That's
I'll
very
brutalize
cool.
his name. Davide Pinadole, I think, was his name. So apologies for brutalizing the pronunciation there. But yeah, gritty fantasy, which, sort of showed me the potential of gritty fantasy in PBTA. That's kind of my preference when I play fantasy games, is sort of less gonzo, sort of grittier, low magic, if you will, fantasy. So Ironsworn really started out as a hack of his, base moves and play sheets and grew from there.
Yeah, I think Davide will be very excited to hear that. That's awesome.
He's been really generous through the process too, so much appreciation.
Oh, nice. I'm glad you guys work together. That's cool. All right, let's jump on over here and read a Sitch. Okay, Sean?
Awesome.
Read a Sitch. All right, so Sean, I have heard that the game we're about to talk about, Ironsworn, that you created it with the idea of solo gaming being an aspect of play, or a mode of play that is pretty well supported. Yep. Is that right?
Yeah, it's pretty much out of the box, meant to support solo play, and that was in mind for me from the very start.
Okay, and when we say solo play, we don't mean, because when a lot of times I say solo play when I run a game
one
for
player,
my
one
wife,
GM,
but yeah, you actually mean solo, like solitaire, like one person in the book play, right?
Yeah, one person entirely playing by yourself, sort of wearing the GM hat and player hat as needed.
Man, that is intimidating and exciting. I really want to learn more about this. So talk to me about solo role-playing. What is the deal? Why don't you have any friends, Sean?
Well, I mean, it all goes back to a lonely childhood. No. Solo role-playing, tabletop role-playing, has really been around as long as role-playing has, or at least almost so. The early editions of Dungeons & Dragons contained dungeon generation tables that would let you sort of do a solitaire play by generating the rooms and encounters and treasures within a dungeon. There was plenty of people back then who maybe didn't have a group, maybe were just trying out the game, whatever, and they would sort of run through, a dungeon scenario just by generating it randomly. And the book, for all intents and purposes, would sort of function as a DM for them by generating the challenges and the encounters that they face. And then you'd use the mechanics and imagine sort of your character in that scenario, and that was, all part and parcel of role-playing.
All kidding aside, the first experience I had with a true RPG was the red boxed set, where I went through the adventure in the believe it was in the player's handbook, if I remember correctly. And right outside the keep, I faced a carrion crawler and went down. I went down hard.
And, from D&D, it was, you can look at early games like Tunnels and Trolls. Solo gaming was actually a big part of, I think, Tunnels and Trolls' success back in the day. They had countless solo modules that people would play. Choose Your Own Adventure books, which are those, books you could buy in the bookstore that you'd read a paragraph, it'd send you to another number based on your choice. You'd go there. Some had some basic mechanics around hit points and stats and those sort of things, some less so. So all those things, I think, were definitely solo play, but really, I think where I first encountered sort of a more sort of modern, fresh take on solo play was the Mythic GM emulator by Tana Pigeon, which came out maybe the mid-2000s or early 2000s. It sort of feels like it's always been around because it's been so influential with the RPG community. But that sort of showed people a way to actually bring less mechanical focus, more narrative focus, more story, more surprises, to actually create a little bit more of a narrative in your playing versus doing like a dungeon crawl or something that felt more programmed like a Choose Your Own Adventure book.
Yeah, Mythic GM emulator. I've heard of that. I saw it on Drive-Thru RPG. I think I may have a copy of it. That's a pretty interesting approach. But do you need Mythic GM emulator to run Ironsworn then?
No, it's all meant to be out of the box. So a lot of the mechanics in Ironsworn are actually inspired by Mythic GM emulator. The use of oracles, basically and there's several other systems which is sort of springboarded off that, basically solo RPG engines. If you go through Drive-Thru, there's a ton of them with different, some are meant to be more universal, some are specific sort of genres or settings, specific scenarios, etc. And really what these solo games leverage is number one, they have some sort of mechanical foundation to help generate story, meaning the mechanics will, prompt things like complications and surprises, so that you as sort of the player are not constantly having to also be the author, right? You can encounter situations that you didn't expect. Your story can go off the rails and lead you in unexpected directions, much like if you're playing with a GM, what you would expect in a GM-led game. And they also use what the community commonly refers to as oracles, which are things like random tables, or you can get like Rory story cubes, which are dice with icons on them, which will serve as sort of inspirational prompts for people to sort of feed off of. Even things like runestones or tarot cards or something like that. People will play with neat. And just leverage those as sort of visual ways to imagine answers to their questions or to generate new situations or events.
I like to hear about the idea of being surprised. That's the one thing that worried me about solo is like, okay, I'm the GM and I'm the player, so how do I not always know what the right answer is? So that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's surprising and really exciting how often you can be surprised in a solo play, and how often these sometimes somewhat abstract oracles will actually feed so directly into the context of what's happening in your story, in your game. That's something I've heard constantly from the community through the development of Ironsworn and all the previews, and that's something I've certainly encountered in my own solo play. And that just comes down to the sort of the power of your humans. We're just wired to tell stories, right? We have just an innate sense of what's dramatic and cool and interesting, and we'll feed off these abstract oracles, apply context, and just run with it. And you hear people saying, well, how do I run like a mystery game in a solo play, right? If I don't have the answer, how do I know who killed the guy or whatever? And the dark secret of GMing, right, is oftentimes the GM has no idea either, or the GM might have an idea and the players come up with their own solution to the mystery, and it's like, well, that's about 50 times cooler than I came up with, so yeah, let's just run with it. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors involved in GMing, and there's that, I think, lends itself to the idea of solo play and the fact that you can take narrative control to just do what feels right in the moment, but you can also depend upon these mechanics and these abstractions around oracles to help feed your narrative and take it in new directions.
I'm curious though, Sean. I'm trying to visualize this. Is this a thing where you verbalize? Like, are you talking out loud through the decisions? do you write out when you're doing solo play? Like when you do it, I'm sure everybody has a different way to do it. But
yeah, I mean,
what does it look like when you do it?
Generally, to me, it's just a text file with bullet points, just sort of mostly as a prompt for me to when I come back to the game, I'll sort of remember what's going on. And also, and I actually say this in Ironsworn, like the act of keeping a record in solo play, I think is really important, because when you're at a table with folks, it's like that shared narrative space makes it real, right? It creates something solid that you can all return to, you can talk about later. It lends it much more solidity as a story, as a narrative, than when you're by yourself. It can feel a little bit ephemeral, right? If it's just you.
Right.
But if you're writing it down in whatever form, some people write very detailed things and share it with others, and it's sort of a narrative format. Others will just scribbles in a journal, others blog entries, whatever format works best for you and helps sort of fire up your creative energy. That's what you do. Keeping some sort of record is obviously not required beyond like the typical sort of thing you do on your character sheet, but I recommend it just because, again, it lends a little bit weight, I think, to your story and sort of transitions it into the real world a little bit more. Yeah,
I've found, and this isn't solo, but in participating in Play by Post, I love having the record of the story that we've told. It makes it easier to go back and reread months, years later. There is one forum where I actually went in and fixed a typo from 4 years ago, but that's fine. That's not a problem, right? That's really interesting, Sean. And another cool thing about solo play and having engines that allow you to do that is that you can try out games that maybe you can't get to the table any other way.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
I mean, that's what solo play has been through me for the years, is you just have this just incredible wealth of just really awesome systems, and it sometimes it's just painful, the fact you're never going to get this thing to the table, right? How many Kickstarters have I participated in where I know I'm just backing it because it looks awesome, it looks cool, I just want to add it to my library, but the reality is I'm never getting the thing to my table, right? There's just a limited amount of gaming time, and solo play gives you some flexibility. It's easier to fit into a schedule. You can do it for a few minutes at a time versus planning an evening or several hours to get a game together with others and coordinating all those schedules. And just the fun of sort of experiencing, mechanical innovation or the cool setting or cool characters in a game system is, rewarding unto itself.
Neat. Well, Sean, I appreciate it. That was really interesting to learn a bit about solo play from you. Now, as you said, Ironsworn is a game with solo play functionality, so I would like it if we could open our brain to Ironsworn and learn a bit more.
Yeah, let's do so.
Open your brain. I was talking to a buddy of mine just before this, and I mentioned the name Ironsworn. I'm going to be interviewing Sean. He's going to talk about his game, Ironsworn. He said, wow, that is a hardcore name. Like, do you have to listen to black metal while you're playing? And I said, I don't know. Ironsworn to me sounds like a Burning Wheel life path that an orc would take, and so I love it.
Yeah, totally.
Because an orc takes it. That's why.
Yeah, I mean the name itself just came out of the trying to mechanize vows and quests. Like that's just the key sort of engine behind the game, is the idea of swearing a vow and embarking upon a quest to fulfill that vow, and what happens as part of that, and whether you succeed or whether it goes off the rail, whether you fulfill your vow, whether you forsake it. That's the entire game itself is sort of built around that. And then Iron, as a title, was originally meant to sort of evoke a little bit of an Iron Age aesthetic. That's kind of part of the setting and part of some of the design and imagery and stuff like that around the game. And then within the game, within the fiction, you're actually swearing on iron, whether it be your weapon or your armor or a pendant handed down by your mother, whatever the case may be. You define that as part of your character. So it's all sort of wrapped in fictionally, but it's also the mechanical engine that drives the story.
So you have a built-in setting for Ironsworn. What's this thing all about? Talk to me about Ironsworn a bit more.
It's elevator pitch. It's about being heroic in a world where really your only reward for your sacrifices and struggles is fulfilling your vows, staying true to your word. It's about forming bonds with people and communities and how those bonds you formed will ultimately define, what becomes of you once all your vows are fulfilled or forsaken. The default setting is called the Ironlands because I'm obviously leaning on the word iron to the nth degree. In the setting itself, it's a sort of a wild, untamed frontier. The people who are called Ironlanders settled here a couple of generations ago. They were basically fleeing a cataclysm in the old world, and now they're just trying to survive, trying to make it through from one season to the next in this inhospitable place, which is generally out to rid them, get them out of this land.
Mm-hmm.
The setting itself is really only lightly detailed in the book. One of my sad admissions of being an RPG fan is that I don't love setting books a lot. I don't have the patience for reading like really dense, detailed RPG settings. I really admire them and I love leafing through them and picking up the cool idea, but it's just I tend to glaze over a little bit when I'm reading them. So within the book, I call it lightly sketched. It's sort of the outlines of some regions and some history, but really it's meant for the players to fill in the blanks as they play and discover it through play. And there's world building exercises you go through and sort of define, is there magic here? Are there supernatural monsters? What does the leadership look like within these communities? What role does religion play here? And then you sort of decide from some responses to that, and then you actually get some quest starters based on your responses that potentially sort of feed into how you start your story as well.
It seems like it's pretty infinitely replayable, like you would expect an RPG to be. That's good.
Yeah, I hope so. And it's also intended to be really hackable. And that's a little bit, I guess, contrary to some of the PBTA ethos, right? Which is tying a setting and characters really tightly to the mechanics. It's intended to be slightly more open than that. Really, with some mild tweaks, it's appropriate for any setting that has an emphasis on quests or missions, in order to sort of drive the mechanics around that. And throughout like the preview releases, folks were bending the game to fit stuff that I could never even imagine they'd do with it. Company-based play in World War II, right? And things like that, where I was just amazed what they were managing to do with that. So that wasn't a huge intent in the beginning, but it became a little bit more of an intent, and I tried to course correct the game towards that just because I saw people playing off the foundational mechanics, the foundational moves to, take that ball and run with it. And I really love seeing that.
That's interesting. So you put out a preview, and then based on how people are playing, you've tweaked the rules along to fully support what the community's doing. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, I had about a year and a half of previews. I started just releasing chapters, basically, like laid out chapters, which was a ridiculous decision, but hindsight is 2020. And then just threw it out to the community. And after a while, it started getting a little of attention and started getting people playtesting it. And any designer, of course, will tell you the value of playtesting, and iterative feedback through releases and all those sort of things. But as my first actual public release, that was a big lesson to me, just ongoing as well.
Talk to me a little bit about the mechanics. What are the mechanics in Ironsworn that might be different if I come from Apocalypse World?
It might be a little easier to talk about what it shares with Apocalypse World first, which is the core idea moves, the player-facing roles, the non-binary results.
Mm-hmm.
During playtesting, I didn't advertise it or position it as a PBTA game. I'd sometimes sort of caveat by saying it's inspired by and borrowing liberally from the Apocalypse, because I certainly wanted to give credit to the source materials, but I didn't want to create expectations with PBTA fans and have them find it contrary to what they'd expect from a PBTA game. But definitely, the PBTA DNA is boiled in there, and that as a base is pretty essential. Where
would you fork, or what are the interesting parts or the things you would definitely talk to me coming from Apocalypse World into Ironsworn?
There's definitely the game modes, which we talked a little bit about. There's solo play. It supports solo play. It supports what I call co-op play, which is basically GM-less play with more than one player, so 2 players, 3 players. It's designed really for small group play. And then you can play it traditional with a GM as well. All the mechanics will support a GM play, and you can adjust the dials in terms of player narrative control to your group's preference. There's a lot of flexibility there. I think it's most of its popularity and interest from people, I think, has been in the solo community. I think just by virtue that community has been pretty enthusiastic about it, but it also supports traditional play. Aside from that, just running through maybe a quick list of core differences, it's got a different dice mechanic. Instead of the 2d6 mechanic that we all know and love from most PBTA games, you're rolling 3 dice. You're rolling d6, which I call the action die. You're rolling 2 10-sided dice, which are called the challenge dice. The d6 you add your stat to. You might get another bonus maybe added to that. And then you compare that, what is called the action score, to your challenge dice. If you beat both dice, that's a strong hit. If you only beat one of those challenge dice, that's a weak hit. If you're equal to or under both those dice, then that's a miss. Basically, that mechanic arose out of a few things. From a wonky math perspective, I needed to extend the range a little bit of results, a little bit farther than 2d6 would allow, and I also needed more results to sort of hit in the weak hit range versus rising up to strong hits as you get into like a +2 or +3 bonus. Those 2d10s, the 2 challenge dice, give me a match mechanic, which is pretty important, especially for solo play. If you roll doubles, you introduce some sort of twist or unexpected action or event. So especially in solo play, that's helpful as a way to drive narrative surprises and complications. If you roll a miss, for example, and you've rolled double 10s on your d10s, you know something horrific is about to happen, right? So you use that as your springboard for just throwing a wrench in the works totally in your character's life and the current narrative. And then I just find, for me, like dice mechanics are all about the math. Like, does the math work and fulfill the objective of some of the mechanics, but also just the feel of the rolls. And I just find that the idea of rolling this d6 in opposition to the d10s, again, especially in solo play, gives you sort of a sense of the world working against you, which is kind of cool and fun in play.
That is terrifying, to roll a d6 against 2d10.
And it's been called a bit brutal. I mean, the math sort of works out. It's not too much more brutal than standard 2d6, but I think that combined with somewhat sort of gritty, harsh environment sort of gives it that tone, I guess. Aside from the dice mechanic, I call it gamey, a little gamier than, not like spoiled meat, but like just it has some sort of meta game aspects. There's some resource management and tracking. You've got a momentum track, for example, which rises and falls based on your actions, and you use that to help change the outcomes of your moves, offset some poor moves or elevate a weak hit to a strong hit, etc.
Oh, nice. So you can effectively resource manage to give yourself a +1 forward kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And
okay.
Nod to City of Judas. That's actually based on a mechanic he had in his game, which I can't remember the at the moment, but it was basically a dice mechanic where you had a d6, and you would just rotate the d6 around to indicate your current momentum in the narrative, and then you could swap that d6 in to replace another die. So pretty similar to that in form and function. And another change, instead of playbooks, characters are built out of what I call assets. I love playbooks a ton. Ever since I first looked at Apocalypse World, I fell in love with those things. But one of the advantages of solo play or small group play is you don't need to worry so much about like niche protection for your players. You don't need to, give everybody sort of their job and their specific role. You can have character creation be a little bit more a la carte. And I love the feel of sort of assembling a character, sort of somewhat a la carte. I always loved, there's a few PBTA games that do that, right? They let you sort of combine playbooks or do things like that. And I always really love that mechanic in those games. So I sort of brought it in here as using assets as a way to sort of assemble your character from these various sort of careers and roles and backgrounds. Companions, which tend to be animal companions, combat talents, which are specific sort of combat skills, and what I call an Ironsworn rituals, which are basically sort of somewhat involved, evocative, low magic sort of spells, essentially. Each asset is basically on your table in your playscape as a poker-sized card. You got 3 abilities, and they're pretty easy to reference. And again, you just sort of pick and choose 3 when you're starting out your character, and then you upgrade those over time or add new ones. If I want to be, for example, a wandering beast hunter with a gift for song, I might choose Outcast and Slayer and Story Weaver, and that's my character at the beginning. But it sort of gives you sort of an evocative, interesting character with some disparate sort of roles in the game that you can play around with.
And can you just randomly draw those cards if you just want to build somebody in a pinch?
I've got that in the game as well. You can basically take your deck of cards, break it into the different categories of assets, choose what you want, discard a couple. There's your character.
Neat. So how do you progress along like a journey or a quest? You said that's a big part of the game.
Yeah, one of the main mechanics of the game is called progress tracks. That's what you use to manage your progress in various sort of or distinct sort of areas of the fight. Quests, which is sort of the main sort of back row aspect of the game. Journeys, which is undertaking a journey to another location. Fights, obvious, and then your bonds with others are also a progress track. Progress tracks aren't far removed from clock mechanics or things like that you've seen in other PBTA games. So like Blades in the Dark has clock mechanics, right? They're used to represent sort of a progression or degression in some cases.
Right.
In Ironsworn, it's a scale of 1 to 10. You just tick boxes as you go, as you what's called mark progress. So you make moves that give the ability to mark progress. When you feel like you've ticked enough boxes to potentially sort of fulfill that piece of the narrative. So I feel like I should be arriving at my destination. I feel like this quest is done. I feel like this fight is done. Then you basically roll some dice to check against your progress track and see whether or not you were right or you were horribly wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, fight similarly when you inflict harm on your opponent and you mark progress. So you feel like you made a decisive move to end this fight against this foe. You roll against your progress track. So you roll your challenge dice against your progress score, which will be on a scale of 1 to 10, and see whether or not you're right. Like, is this foe defeated? Have they surrendered? Have you killed them? Have they fled? Whatever the case may be, based on your goals for the encounter. Or is there some mitigating circumstance where you won this fight a bit at a cost? Or has this thing suddenly turned against you horribly? So everything in the game leverages those progress tracks to sort of revolve both sort of the larger situation and individual scenes in some cases. And it's just a way to help reinforce sort of mechanical progression. So it's, especially for solo players, like it's constantly driving you towards a goal, and it's giving you a visible sort of, in your game space, it's a visible thing that you're sort of marking as you make progress, and you have a reference for how much narrative and mechanical potential you have to achieve that goal. And then it's also doing the job of potentially throwing a wrench in the works of your narrative and sending your story off in directions that you didn't expect.
So tell me, Sean, what is your favorite move in Ironsworn and why?
I'd have to say Swear an Iron Vow, which is the move that's sort of driving everything else in the game. So narratively in the game, it's you as your character making a vow to undergo some perilous quest, to achieve some personal objective, or to do something heroic for your community or for another person. So in the fiction, it's a cool scene. It's almost ritualistic. You're actually swearing on iron. You sort of decide what that looks like in the scene. Maybe you're swearing on your sword or your armor, as I said, or some object that's been handed down to you through generations. What are you doing? What are you saying? What does it look like? You define the fiction of it. Then you roll on the move, the Swear an Iron Vow move, depending on the result of that roll. You might have a clear path forward. You have wind in your sails, so to speak, narratively. You understand the next steps you need to take to move toward, achieving this goal. Or you might face some immediate obstacles. A weak hit means something is in your path. A miss means you face a really dire obstacle before you can even begin to undertake this quest. And that move triggers the gameplay loop of introducing a problem or a goal. You swear to deal with it. You give it a challenge rank. You set up your progress track for that vow. You'll mechanically represent by marking progress on your quest as you achieve milestones. When you fulfill your vow, you get experience points. You get assets or upgrade assets. But your vows will, just by virtue of the other moves, by virtue of the oracles and matches on your challenge dice and things like that, will constantly be, sending you in new directions, taking your quest off the rails, maybe even generating new quests or sub-quests. It's not unlike when you play a computer RPG, right? And you're that character who's supposed to save the world, but you're constantly dealing with these sub-quests, right, that you pick up in the various places you travel to or the people you're talking to. So there's that sort of aesthetic, which sort of is constantly keeping you moving towards, identifiable and personal goals, but also mixing things up in the narrative and sending you off on paths maybe you didn't expect.
As long as it isn't like Fallout 4 when your son's been kidnapped, but all of a sudden now you're in a giant
I hate
city.
that in RPGs where it's always you're the savior of the world, but the pig has gone missing, so can you take care of this for me? It's like, all right. It's not really like that. Like it's a little bit more tied to your personal goals and to situations that are a little bit more urgent in the narrative, right? But there's that sort of like chained quests and subquests sort of aesthetic, and I've even got descriptions of how that might work, where you can your larger quest, you know, you sort of triggers a subquest. You need to, in order to form this alliance, this person basically requires you to swear a vow to do this thing for them, right? So, okay, now I've got to go take care of this. So that becomes a subquest for your larger quest. It becomes a milestone now for your larger quest when you achieve this smaller vow. So you constantly have, you know, a few vows on your sheet, on your character sheet that you're dealing with at any particular time.
Okay. As long as it's not that's all well and good, but I need 10 wolf pelts. I think I can deal with that.
No, none of that. No wolf pelts.
All right. Cool. You got me pretty excited here, Sean, talking about all of these progress tracks and vows and the like. You think maybe we could take Ironsworn for a little bit of a test drive? Maybe act under fire here?
Yeah, let's do so.
All right.
It is time to act under fire.
So you're going to hold my hand here, Sean. I am intimidated by solo play because I don't have anyone I can blame other than myself if I blow it.
You can definitely blame me.
Well, if it's solo play, then it's all my fault. Wait, I can blame the dice. Okay, we're good.
Yeah,
all
plenty of blame on dice to go around.
All right, I have sketched out a bit of a character, mostly just put points in places and noted down things. Plussy has an edge of 2, an iron of 2, a heart of 3, a wits of 1, and a shadow of 1. So real quickly, the stats. So based on that, his edge, his strongest stat is heart, which means that he is good with courage, willpower, sociability, and loyalty. And then his ones are in wits, which is expertise, knowledge, and observation, and shadow, sneakiness, deceptiveness, and cunning. So I'm imagining that Plussy is a little bit of a Porthos style of character, a little heavy set. He is adroit and a capable fighter, but not great at sneaking around. And, maybe his skills of observation are a little flawed as well.
Well, heart is actually one of the most important stats in the game, so you chose well.
I didn't even know that. I just like hearts. I think it's probably
comes into play a lot. So it's, sort of like a lot of people look at it as a charisma stat. Well, there's my dump stat, but it's actually a pretty important stat in the game. So you did good.
Yay! All right. And here I was just like, oh, hearts. That makes me think of Link and Zelda. And yay. Got the default health of 5, spirit of 5, supply of 5, and we start with momentum of 2. That's that stat that I can use to boost my rolls if need be.
Yep.
And then there's a vow. I looked through. You have some really interesting vows to kick things off, and I wanted to highlight some of the Iron Lands. So I chose a Varu clan has marked the trees surrounding my community, claiming it as their territory. An attack is surely imminent. Now, the Varu, I have never heard of this species before. Encountering it here and reading about it in your setting, how would you describe the Varu?
The Varu are one of what I call the firstborn, which is actually, and that's part of the world building exercise you go through when you sit down at the table for your session 0 or whatever. As you go through that world building exercise, you decide whether the firstborn are part of your setting or not, because they're a non-human races, and you might want to lean a little bit more gritty and realistic and humanistic, or you might want to punch up the fantasy elements. So Varu are one of those, and they're a basically what are referred to as sort of a wolf-like species in the game or culture. They are described as somewhat wolf-like in appearance. So basically, humanoid wolves really is what it comes down to. Somewhat inspired for me by old Palladium covers back in the 70s and 80s of Wolfreys that had as part of that game, and just because they're cool and they feel a little Nordic and fit a cold, rugged, harsh northern environment.
Yeah, I really like the features in the write-up. Yellow eyes shining in moonlight, pointed ears and snout-like faces. This, I definitely, if I have to go down, if Plussy has to go down, he's going down to Varu. Sounds interesting to me. Cool. So that's the vow that we have out there. Okay. Maybe we can kick that off. I don't have any bonds. Do you have any bonds that you would suggest would be really easy for a quick play?
Do you typically start with a bond with your, if you're starting your character with a sort of a base in a community, you define that community as a bond. So your home settlement would be a bond, and then typically sort of one or two people there, you do starting bonds. For one shots, I typically sort of recommend, if bonds come up on the fly for you, if you think you should have a bond with this person that just comes up through the fiction, feel free to insert it. And even if you're playing a longer campaign, it's fine to sort of come up with your starting bonds as you go, and then you develop more bonds as you play. But I would definitely mark a bond for your starting community just in case it comes up for us during this quick demo.
All right. The bond is with Gauntlet Village.
Sounds great.
Anything else I need to do to stat up Plussy, my character here?
No, there's assets, of course, but we might, not worry about assets for the moment, just to sort of get you focused. It works fine with the core stats and things like that. And we can sort of focus on at least the mechanics and not complicate things for the purposes of our demo here with assets.
Okay. So how should we get started?
Well, you've got an inciting incident. So the Varus have carved their marks into the trees around your village. That generally means they are claiming that territory, and that an attack is probably imminent. It's basically warning the people in your village, leave or perish. Leaving is not an option maybe for you guys. Maybe winter's closing in, and just picking up everything and moving is not necessarily an option in this setting anyway. Like, it's just not something you can do. So the question becomes, what are you going to do about this? What's sort of the first steps you're taking in this vow? And if you want, we could actually, swear an iron vow now and sort of, spin that up and see what happens.
Let's do it. It's on the cover. This is the thing we don't want to miss. I imagine that there's a longhouse that has just recently been completed, and it is a source of pride for the Gauntlet Village. And we've put so much effort and resources into having a place where we can be safe, and we've saved a great deal of food that we need to be here through the winter as it's coming. And so imagining the Plussy would go before the leader of Gauntlet Village, an older woman who's very wise. She's been here with the Ironlanders for generations, and he would present her his sword, and that's where he would swear to her, Gauntlet Village. I swear that I will protect Gauntlet Village. I will find how we can stop this threat, the Varu, before they encroach upon our lands and kill our people.
Very cool. So you've set the scene. So now you can just make the move and see what happens. Swear an iron vow move. Basically, the trigger for that is when you swear upon iron to complete a quest. Write your vow and give the quest a rank. In this case, we'll just say it's a formidable quest. Unfortunately, we probably won't complete the quest in this quick demo, but that will give us something to shoot for maybe later.
Okay.
And then you're going to roll plus heart. So you're going to make the standard roll of a d6 opposed against those 2d10, and you're going to add your heart to that d6.
All right.
And also you've got a bond with this community, so you're going to be adding a bonus +1 to your heart as well. So that's going to give you +4 to your d6. So that's pretty powerful. Okay. Let's see what happens.
It is a pretty powerful roll. I unfortunately only rolled a 2, so that means my total is a 6 with a +3 from heart and 1 from the community.
Yep.
My d10s, of course I would roll a 10, but I also rolled a 4, so that's a weak hit, right?
Yep, that's a weak hit indeed. So on a weak hit, you're determined, but begin your quest with more questions than answers. Take +1 momentum and envision what you do to find a path forward. So the +1 momentum in Ironsworn is, momentum generally is a reward you get for sort of success on moves, and it just gives you that bank, right, that you can leverage to potentially offset a failed move down the road. But we also have this success is mitigated by the fact that you're not quite sure how to begin this quest. And I think that was even inherent to your vow, right? You don't know how you're going to deal with this, but you're going to find a way. So what are you going to do to find a way?
I would imagine that Plussy would head out, try to find areas where trees were marked. I'm imagining, just in case it's not clear to any listeners, the way they mark it is with their claws and with weapons.
Make that. Yeah.
And so he finds that, and you know what? Why doesn't he grab a companion? Maybe we could have a bond with someone who's a good tracker, because I don't imagine that Plussy, with his one wits and one shadow, is a heck of a forest tracker. He's more of a thumper. So maybe he grabs some kind of tracker that normally hunts animals, because the plan is that these beasts, these Varu, are akin to beasts. Then perhaps we can track them back to wherever it is that they have a lair.
Yeah, that sounds good, and I think that definitely sort of fulfills the more questions than answers. You're basically trying to figure out where they are potentially coming from, get some intelligence around, is the attack imminent, what's happening, etc. So it seems like a good starting place.
Cool. So I've befriended the tracker Lafreniere, and he and I will head out into the wood. Of course, that's probably some snow is already starting to fall, winter imminent, and hopefully that could be a benefit to us. Maybe we can catch a track. So what would we do there? How do we figure out if I can find a way back to their lair?
Well, in this case, you've got this narrative support by having an experienced tracker with you. So to me, the challenge is less about sort of finding tracks than it is sort of following those tracks and undertaking that journey, right? And so I don't think we need to make moves necessarily to do the tracking for you, since you've sort of got narrative authority to not make that move. But the journey itself, going outside the walls of your settlement is perilous enough that I think you're going to have to, undertake a journey and see what happens.
Oh, fantastic. Let's undertake a journey then. All right, so I do the normal roll. I do have the tracker with me. Will that be a bond that I can count upon here?
Unfortunately not in this case.
Okay.
There's some assets that would give you that ability and some things like that, but not so much here. I think you've sort of leveraged that narrative authority in a pretty effective way thus far.
What's the right stat to apply to this roll?
So undertake a journey when you travel across hazardous or unfamiliar lands. First, you're going to set the rank of your journey. We'll call this a troublesome journey. I think we envision this probably being pretty close by, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then for each segment of your journey, you're going to roll plus wits. So that's your stat. So the actual bond you do get a leverage here, though, is your community bond, because when you set off from the community, you're going to add +1 to this initial roll.
Oh, well, yay. All right, so that means I am rolling a +2 to my roll. Here we go. Well, another weak hit as I rolled a 10 again, and a 1 on the challenge dice, but I rolled a 2, so adding 2 more to that makes it a 4, so weak hit.
Okay. So on a weak hit, you're going to reach your waypoint, so you're going to mark progress on that progress track that we've set up for your journey. Troublesome journey, we're going to mark basically 3 boxes per waypoint, so that's essentially getting you 3 boxes of the 10 filled in, so that's a pretty effective initial segment, but you're also going to suffer -1 supply.
Ooh, okay.
On a strong hit, you get an option to take some momentum in exchange for some supply, or not suffer supply at all. So basically, as you move farther and farther from civilization, your supply is going to be dwindling, and you need to return to to refresh. So within the fiction, as you're making this journey, you would, I like to sometimes picture it as montage scenes, right? Like the Lord of the Rings helicopter shots as the Fellowship is trudging over ridges and things like that. So you always sort of wrap these things in the fiction. So what is Plussy looking like as he's undertaking this journey?
Well, I imagine that Lafreniere is having no problem whatsoever, but Plussy in his heavy armor is probably becoming more and more tired. If we were to use the Lord of the Rings, he probably looks a good bit like Gimli, sweat on his brow, his shoulders slumping more and more, but there's a hard edge to his eyes. He's not going to give up, but this is once he reaches them. If someone Veru were to come upon him right now, he would be in a bit of trouble because he is starting to get tired. So he's munching on some kind of like nuts and berries that he has in a little bag to try to use up those supplies and keep his energy up.
Great. So as you're moving forward to try to sort of undertake this journey, so generally as you're moving, you're making decisions narratively and mechanically. Am I interspersing other moves here? I'm going to try to, hunt and resupply. Am I going to make camp and try to refresh? Generally, when you're starting your journey, you're trying to make obviously as much progress as you can before your supply dwindles. So typically you'd make especially on a low ranked journey, you'd make a couple undertake a journey rolls and see if you can sort of effectively get there in a couple of segments.
Okay, well, let's make one more.
Okay.
All right, boy, I keep rolling 10s.
And this time you're not going to be adding your bond.
Oh, man, because I'm too far away from the community. Yep. Well, this is not good, because if wits is what I'm rolling with, I've rolled an effective 3, and my challenge dice are a 10 and a 6. That's a failure, right? I don't even have enough momentum to even push things up.
Yep, no momentum to burn there. So on a miss, when you're undertaking a journey, you're waylaid by a perilous event. You pay the price. Pay the price is sort of one of the main moves you're going to be making, unfortunately, in Ironsworn. Basically, it's for solo players. It gives them an opportunity to basically sort of mechanize, basically what amounts to the GM moves from other PBTA games, right? Like you see in Dungeon World or something like that. So it's a little bit of that sort of wrapped into either sort of deciding what happens based on the context of the situation and what would be cool for your story, or rolling on a random table. For this, since we don't have a ton of context, I think this is maybe an opportunity to ask the Oracle, actually, and get a little bit of an inspirational prompt on what's happening. Sounds fun. Here. Okay, so let's do that. So ask the Oracle is another move in Ironsworn that's sort of geared towards solo player, but also useful for low prep, no prep GMing and things like that. You basically can ask yes/no questions, give something a likelihood of occurring, ask a yes/no question, or you can spark an idea. So you use some of those oracles that we talked about earlier, some of those creative prompts to give you an idea of what you encounter or what happens. And I think that's probably the way to go for us. And I could actually make a roll for you. We have super handy digital oracles online.
Ooh, I have a question in mind. It could tie right back into the fiction. Does Plussy run into a Veru scouting party?
Yeah, let's do that. So let's decide the likelihood of that result. Your options are almost certain.
I think it's pretty high, right? Yeah. He's headed straight towards their territory. That's kind of his intent. But
so would you call it almost certain or likely?
Let's go with likely.
Okay. So go ahead and roll your 2d10s. You're going to treat them as percentile dice, basically, a tenths digit and a units digit.
I've rolled a 97.
Okay, that likely occurs on a 26 or greater on that yes or no table. That's occurred for sure. So you have run into the Veru. So frame that up for me. What is that looking like?
I think at this point, Lafreniere has trailed back to the community, and so Plussy is by himself, and he is moving along underneath a ridge, and he hears above, say it's 20, 25 feet above on a snow-covered top of this small ridge along the tree line. There are a few Veru that have smelled him coming and lay in wait. And then as he looks up, he sees their yellow eyes reflected in the moonlight, because that's just such a cool thing.
All right, so what are you going to do?
I think that what he would do is he's not going to immediately draw his sword. He's going to hold his hands out to either side and say, "I wish to talk. There's no need for violence. Try to appeal to see if there's any humanity within them or any opportunity to open some kind of parlay.
That sounds like a compel move to me. So in Ironsworn, we have a compel move when you attempt to persuade someone to do something. Envision your approach and roll.
Okay.
Sounds like what you're doing to me.
All right. Well, let's give that a shot. And this may be the last roll of our little demo, so hopefully I can pull this one off.
So this is going to be a heart roll because there's options, obviously, in compel just based on the stat you use based on your approach. So charm, pacify, barter, or convince would sound to me like your approach here. So that's going to be plus heart, which is your favorite stat. So
yay! All right, here we go. Yay! I did not roll another 10. Rolled a 3 on the d6, so with my 3 heart, that's a 6. I rolled a 9 and a 3. Now, I have 3 momentum. If I spent the 3 momentum, would that push me to a 9? And does the player win a tie?
Sadly, no. Basically, the way you use momentum is you're swapping, you're canceling one of your challenge dice whenever it's equal to or whenever it's greater than whenever you challenge.
So dice. I could spend a momentum to cancel that 9?
What's your momentum right now?
My momentum is a 3. It starts at 2, and I got 1 momentum earlier.
Yeah, if you had 10 momentum, basically, you could cancel that 9.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So the momentum, you spend the amount of momentum to cancel. Okay, gotcha.
Yep, exactly. So that sounds like another weak hit.
It is. I'm all about some weak hits.
Yep. So on a weak hit as above, meaning it sort of plays off the strong hit. Strong hit, they'll do what you want or share what you know, take plus momentum. On a weak hit, however, as above, but they ask something of you in return. Envision what they want. Ask the Oracle if unsure.
I'm going to ask the Oracle. I'm unsure.
So that can be phrased as a yes or no question, or we can just go to a creative prompt to find out.
Let's create a prompt. I'm interested in that.
Okay. All right. One of the oracles in Ironsworn is action and theme tables. Basically, it's a verb and a noun. So it's a good sort of abstract way to just give you some words that help sort of hopefully give a little bit of a spark of inspiration of how that sort of applies to the context of your current situation. So give me 2 D100 rolls. We'll see what we get for that.
I just rolled a 7 and a 77. Wow, that's crazy. Okay, so avenge.
Interesting.
And then on the 77 is a problem? Huh.
Yeah, avenge problem. So does that trigger anything for you in terms of an idea of what that means?
I think what could happen here is the Varu explain that the reason they have claimed Gauntlet Village as their territory is that one of their young was hunted by a member of Gauntlet Village, or so they think, and so that's why they're after Gauntlet Village is after vengeance. That's the problem. Does that jive with that idea?
Yeah, that's totally awesome. Again, you're applying sort of context to the current situation, and that would lead to an awesome story, I think. Like, how do you deal with that situation? Holy, that's just mired in all kinds of stuff, right? So.
Well, Sean, that was really interesting. Thank you so much for walking me through Ironsworn and coming on to talk about the game.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Awesome. And this game is available. You've got a website that we'll link in the show notes, but it's also available on DriveThruRPG, right?
Yep, and it is a free game. The core rulebook is free and will always stay free, so it's a 270-page, fairly robust offering that you can get for free. You get all the asset cards for free. You get all the reference materials, etc. for free. Also available via DriveThruRPG if you prefer that. And then there's some accessories coming out. I've got printed asset cards coming out. You can get the hard copy of the rulebook on DriveThruRPG. And I've also got a 36-page reference booklet, which is a nice sort of concise way to have all the Oracle tables and have all the moves in a nice pre-printed format, so you don't have to print out your own reference materials for the table. That'll be coming out in a couple of weeks as well.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks again, Sean. I really appreciate getting a chance to know more about Ironsworn.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. Thank you.
Hi listeners, I wanted to let you know that the newest issue of Codex, Joy 2, is now available in the Gauntlet's $4 Patreon feed. It's a sequel to the original Codex Joy, and it's terrific. Here is what you'll find inside. Storm Riders, a rules-like game inspired by the action-packed fantasy cartoons of the 1980s, such as Masters of the Universe and Thundercats. A Feast of Jovial Moments, a collection of evocative images for Swords Without Master and other swords and sorcery games. Grandma's Drinking Song, a hilarious songwriting LARP that tells the story of a family of Jewish bootleggers in 1930s New York City. True Beauty, a framework that recontextualizes the game Monster Hearts 2 to be about young queer people of color in the ballroom scene of 1980s Harlem. Our miscellany, 36 local holidays and celebrations, 5 original illustrations, and a gorgeous custom layout by Jake Householder. You can get Codex Joy 2 by making a $4 or higher pledge on the Gauntlet Patreon by November 30th. As a bonus, you will also receive the original Codex Joy. And a quick reminder that back issues of Codex can be found on Drive-Thru RPG. Thanks.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.